Today is May 7th, 2010. This is Deb Moore of the Veterans History Project. I'm speaking with Paul Meiers of Greenville, Michigan.
My legal name is Oldest Paulus Meiers.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Good.
Paul Meiers is, my middle name is Paul, Paulus rather. And
Okay.
I shortened it to Paul, and I've been using that ever since. Nobody can pronounce my first name correctly, so that is the reason why.
Okay. So tell us a little bit, Paul, about where you were born.
I was born in Latvia. It's between Estonia and Lithuania,
Okay.
in a little town called Talsi.
Uh-huh.
In 1938. My earliest memory goes back to 1943. So
Okay. When you were
that was
about...
about 5 years old.
Okay, and
because
what
I was
is...
born in 1938.
Okay, and what's that memory?
Well, the memories, I had a good life. My father was in charge of a big government farm. And life to me was good and easy until the German army came along.
Tell us, what did your father grow on the farm?
Just about everything. It was a self-sustaining, it was a large farm, to my knowledge, because during harvest time, etc., even in summertime, there were a lot of, even kids were there. I suspect that if you wanted to get a welfare check or something, now this is, I don't know, but this is that you had to work a certain amount of time at this farm. It was also an experimental farm because my father was an agronomist, which is, he experimented with crops in that farm too. But there were cows, chickens, lots of horses. My father had a car at his disposal, but I very seldom saw him use it, if ever. Most of the time he used a horse and buggy, or he rode a horse.
Oh, did he? Did he?
Yeah, and I went back, I don't know, going to go forward, I went back 14 years ago to Latvia.
Did you?
To get a birth certificate. Well, I had to take an old man's remains back there, which was my father's friend.
Okay.
And when I went back there, I found the place where I was born.
Did you? Did you remember any of it?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I remember quite but I'll go back and explain the story.
Sure.
And then when the Germans came in, they took over the farmhouse, they took over my father's offices, and everything. Well, I had a altercation with one of the German soldiers. And
Tell me how old you were at this time.
I was 6.
Okay. So they took the Germans.
In 1944.
Took over your town when you were 6. Okay.
They took over the house and everything else, except our bedrooms. To my recollection, we still had that. But I had this altercation with a German soldier, and my father I don't know if because of it, my father hitched up a team of horses, and my mother was pregnant at the time with my brother. We headed back to, or rather we went to my grandfather's, which was about 40 miles, or 40 kilometers. We stayed there for a week. Well,
So you just left?
We just left. My father stayed there. So
But he took
my mother was pregnant, and my mother loved to take walks in the morning. We had no radio. I don't know if they had a phone. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't recall that. But we were out in the field, and we saw clouded dust in the distance, and they were soldiers, but they were dressed in brown uniforms. They were not German.
Okay.
They picked up my grandfather and picked up my grandmother and took them away. When they left the farmhouse, my mother and I, who hitched a team of horses, well, I say my mother, I don't know how much help I was at 6 years, but anyway, we headed back. When we got into the yard at the house, we jumped from one wagon to the other. I didn't even get into the house.
Right.
And we headed for the coast.
Okay.
which was Leopold, which is a coastal town.
Okay.
We got there. My father sold the horses. We spent one night there,
Uh-huh.
and we got on a German ship. Whether it was a private ship or a military ship, I don't know.
Okay.
But my mother's brother was supposed to come with us, but I distinctly remember his wife had a fuss just before we got on the ship, and he turned around and he went back. Well,
To follow her.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So subsequently, I found out that that family was shipped off to Siberia. And anyway, we were going to Germany. That ship was crowded, very crowded with people.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Let just stop here just a second. I want to make sure I have this straight. So, what was your altercation with the German soldier in your home? Do you remember?
They stacked their equipment or whatever it was in one corner, and I got curious, and
And you started looking at the stuff.
yeah, well, he yelled at me, and didn't know what he said. I didn't speak German at the time.
Right.
But, okay, I left it alone. But later on, I got curious, and I did. And he kicked me in the fanny.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I went
Sprawling
on the floor, etc. So I got angry.
Uh-huh.
I went outside, and I picked up a rock, and I waited for him. And he came through the door, and I threw the rock at him. I did hit him.
Uh-huh.
But I got so scared, I didn't run.
Uh-huh.
I stood there.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And he started coming after me. So a German officer, I guess he was an officer, intervened or said something to him, etc. And that was the end of that. But the next day, my father shipped me out.
Okay.
On my
So
mother.
then your father, were you the oldest child?
Yes.
Yes.
My brother was born on the ship one day out.
So then your dad, after this altercation, your dad gets the horses hitched up and takes you and your pregnant mother to his parents' home?
He didn't take it. My mother and I, we just went.
Oh, you just went, he said, to her parents.
To her parents' home.
Okay.
They
And
had
then
a
you
farm.
said something about then you came back to your farmhouse.
Well, we came back after they were picked up and shipped
They
off to
shipped
Siberia.
Graham and Grandpa away. Why didn't they ship you and her to Siberia too?
Why didn't they? Because they couldn't find us. We were out in the field. We hid.
Because you knew they were coming.
Well, we saw them coming, yes.
The cloud of dust.
Yeah. Well, that's what I recall. A lot of this is a little fuzzy.
Well,
but,
sure. But your Grandma and Grandpa couldn't hide in the fields with you?
Well,
Or
they
didn't?
didn't know they were coming, I guess. I don't know. But my mother and I, we were out, at a distance. And,
Yeah, and so she sees her parents being taken away.
yeah, well, we never saw them again.
Do you remember her reaction that day? Not too much.
Not really, other than she was upset. My mother had one quality at that time, which later on in years, her nerves were totally shot. But at that particular time, she could still think pretty good.
Enough to hide you and her, and then to go back home to the farm, to your dad.
After they had left, we where else we were going to go, I don't
Right.
know. Like I said, I don't remember the conversations and all of that.
Right. But then the Germans took you and your family and put you on a ship.
Yes, no, I don't know whether it was a private ship, because when my father sold the horses and the wagon, I assume he sold them, we went on the ship. How he did that, I do not know. Whether he made a deal with the Germans or whether he just bought a ticket or what.
So it was a good thing being on the ship.
Yeah, because there were a lot of people there. We were going to Dancing, Germany,
Okay.
which was 2 days out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, on the second day, my brother was born, and it was so crowded, he was born on the captain's quarters on the ship.
Oh my.
My brother is a doctor here in Grand Rapids.
Is he? Uh-huh. What's his name?
Vilnius.
Vildas.
Meiers, Meiers. He's a baby doctor. His offices are in Cascade.
Okay.
I don't know the exact address, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know how to get there.
Right. Okay, so you go to this town in Germany.
to dancing.
Okay.
My first recollection or my first night in dancing was we were sleeping in bunks 3 high,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember in the middle of the night there was a light shining on the small table, and we were in this, I think this was regimented by the Germans, I don't know. But we had to go, it's like refugees. They had to control them some way.
Right, right,
And all of this, somebody else could give you better information. I can't.
right.
I was a
But
kid.
you remember it was a refugee camp?
I remember all of it, or most of it. It said it's getting a little fuzzy, but
Yeah.
that first night, there was a light shining on the table. I saw these big rats, at least in my mind, running across the table.
Oh, you
They
don't
may have
forget
been
that.
smaller than that, but they seemed awful big. But from there, we went to about 2 or 3 other stations. They put us on train. We were heading for Nuremberg, I guess, because that's where we wound up.
Okay.
But every place when you got off the train, they had this delousing station. And what it was this big trough, sort of like you put corn in nowadays where you drive a truck underneath, except this was a small version. And there you pulled the handle, etc., and this cloud of dust. Well, the cloud of dust got in under your neck and everything else, and it itched like the devil. That part I remember. We got into Nuremberg. When we got into Nuremberg, they herded us and put us in this big gymnasium. I guess it was a gymnasium, but it looked like a gymnasium. And there they had bunks, 4 high. And between the bunks, if you were a fat person, forget it, you couldn't get in there. Well, I was a kid, so I slept on the top bunk. Well, there was a man next to me, etc. And I guess I found out later he was hauling either coal sacks or something heavy, because a day or two later he died. And
From lung disease, you think?
no,
No.
it wasn't from lung. It was just from
Heart?
overworking, I guess.
Okay.
Or hauling the sacks. But ever since
Oh,
then,
so it was, you had to do work in the camp?
well, it wasn't in camp. This was in town already in
Oh, okay.
Nuremberg.
Okay.
But from there, the bombing was going on.
Okay.
So I don't remember this part, other than I remember at least 2 places we were at. One, my father was a pretty good bricklayer or handyman. He built, it was no bigger than this room, etc., maybe a little bit bigger, of a bombed out building, etc., and we lived there for, I don't remember the amount of time. And from there we moved to an apartment on the 2nd floor. That's where I got hurt. All of this happened between November of 1944 to the summer of 1945. But when we moved on the apartment on the 2nd floor, one day, well, the day before, we were going to these bomb shelters. And this bomb shelter, a pipe burst with water, and I stood in water for a long time. Well, the next day I had a fever. So we were on the 2nd floor, and there, the bombing was not close, but these air buried sirens was every 10 minutes apart, one right after the other. And there was a wall next to the building where I was at, and somehow something shook it or whatever, and the wall collapsed on the building that I was in.
Oh, no.
And I got a piece of metal in my back.
Uh-huh.
And I started bleeding. I bled for, I guess, a day or, I don't know for how long.
Long time, yeah.
But I had well, I called her an aunt, but she was actually our next door neighbor to my grandparents in Latvia.
Okay.
And she was with us.
Uh-huh.
Her name was Irene Kubelinch. Anyway, she knew how to speak German fluently, and I don't know what connection she had, but she talked to a German army doctor. And I got this story later that, well, she said that, you know, if you don't do something with this boy, he's going to die because he's bleeding. So the doctor put me in one of his ambulances and shipped me out of town.
By yourself?
Yep. So this was a sanitarium supposedly built into a hospital about 45 miles outside of Nuremberg. And there I stayed for 6 months. I saw my father once. I did not see my mother. But they operated on me. I still got a hole in my back, but it's rather interesting. If you look at my x-rays, there's a hole in my rib. The rib is to here. There's a hole, and the rib continues. It's grown back. But actually, that saved my life. But 6 months later, the war was over by then.
Okay.
They put me on a train. To my recollection, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but to my recollection, they didn't tell me whether I was to see my folks on the other end. But all I know is I was a scared puppy.
Well, yeah, you didn't know where you're going.
So I was never so happy to see my folks on the train platform in Nuremberg. But somehow they knew I would be
They
there.
knew, but they just didn't. Nobody communicated
They were
that with
already
you.
living in the camp by that time.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
to my understanding, these camps were set up. That's just to my understanding.
Right.
These camps were set up because you were not German citizens, so the Americans had to control the refugees, and that's what we were. And put us in these camps. So that's where we wound up. Now, when I got to the camp, I remember a lot of barbed wire. To me, it looked like it must have been a prisoner camp, a war camp, or some kind of prisoner camp.
Right.
And there, when we got there, my recollection was if you were a kid, you got 2 meals a day. If you were grown up, you got 1 meal a day.
Wow.
They had this big dining hall. And I remember my mother going through the coffee line because you could go through there. They give these little jiggers of
Like a little shot of
powders.
coffee.
To this day, I don't care for milk much. And she would dilute it with water, etc. That was our milk. But after a while, they did away with that, and it was just like living in a normal camp. But these, in those camps, there were also a lot of people there that worked for the American Army. They wore black uniforms, and I guess if you served in that for a certain period of time, you would have the right to come to the United States. I don't know. Somebody else could give you that information more so because I can't.
Right.
But anyway, after the Red Cross packages,
Were those dropped in, or where did
they
those
were
come
shipped
from?
in. I mean, the American Army was in control.
Okay.
In fact, one instance, I guess the Russians must have, or however it was kibitzed, but the Russians came under the auspices, I guess they were Russians, under the auspices of American military police. They drove into the camp square there, etc., to make a speech. And after the speech, well, let me back up a bit. What it was high school kids. They got us all kids together and says, when that Russian opens his mouth, you start creating a disturbance. When he would stop talking, you would stop talking. So we did that. But surprisingly, 26 people went back to see to the old country, how great the old country was.
Did they?
Yeah.
So that was your choice then. You could either go to America
that's what
or
the
go
whole
back
idea
home.
was about. I
Okay.
don't know what the agreement was or with whom,
Okay.
but
And
as far as life in the DP camp, it was not bad. Yeah, it was like living in any Army or Air Force camp. They removed, during those 4 years, they removed all the barbed wire that was there. And what was interesting, there was a prisoner of war camp right down the hill from the DP camp that the trains went through. Now, I don't know the story for a fact, but I kind of believe it. There were German prisoners and American guards, and the trains would go through. The German prisoners would hawk on the train. They'd go do whatever their business would do. When the train comes back, they would come back because it was living quarters there for more or less.
So this is the camp. This is the picture of the camp where you lived. Why don't you hold that up for the camera? So we can see. And okay, yeah, keep holding it there. And Paul, what was the name of the camp?
Valka, V-A-L-K-A.
Okay. And that was just outside of Nuremberg?
Outside of Nuremberg, outside of Fürth, actually, which is like Wyoming to Grand Rapids.
And what was, do you remember what the food was like? Or
The food?
Yeah. What did they serve you? Any meals you remember?
Well, yeah, when I first got there, like I said, meals were, I guess,
Like
adequate.
stew
My
or-
memory is fuzzy on
Yeah,
that point,
yeah.
etc. All I know is, during the war, I was hungry. When it got to the camps, I wasn't that hungry anymore.
That's good. That's
But I
good.
remember that one Christmas, the GIs rounded us all and took us to this big building or big gymnasium or whatever it was. And they had a big, huge Christmas tree. And that was my first experience with chocolate that I could remember. Now, I'm not saying I didn't get chocolate in Latvia, but I don't remember.
Okay. Okay.
But with chocolate. And one incident was after the war, they were cleaning out warehouses. And there were trucks and trucks of potatoes and oranges. There were these bomb craters. There was a stadium outside of Fürth that had been bombed. And they took trucks and trucks of that stuff out there. They were bulldozing it over, I guess. And my mother and I spent about 3 days there. And that was my first experience with oranges. We came back with it. And I had eaten oranges to the point where I was sick. But
Let's go back a little bit. Tell me about the bombing, Paul. What do you remember? The siren would go off. You would run to this.
we would run to these shelters if there was time. They gave us a warning. When we get to the shelters, etc., and then they would have a siren that was over, that the bombing was over. Now, what I remember about the bombing shelters, there were steel doors. There was one. You walk a little further, there was another door.
And the sound?
The sound in there, sometimes it would vibrate in there, etc. But other than that, the sound I remember that I didn't like was the women. Maybe it was men too, I don't know. But the women, you would hear a little like that kind of thing, etc.
Right.
My mother, what I do remember about my mother was, when this happened, she would just simply crunch over my brother, because my brother was only a few months old.
Right. Oh. You remember people praying or anything like that, or more moaning and,
No, I don't know.
you know,
That I don't know.
Yeah.
But, you take your pick there.
what they were doing? Okay.
But like I said, this happened 60 some odd years ago. My
I know.
memory is getting a little fuzzy.
You're doing great. You're doing great. Any more memories before your dad made that decision, I guess, that you were all going to go to America?
Well, I don't know how that came about. I think you had to find sponsors. I assume that they had some advertisement for him. Like I said, Harvey Peterson, who sponsored us, his farm was 180 acres. He didn't need us. It was out of the goodness of his heart. And my father, before he died, said there's two people that I cherish most as Americans. One of them was Harvey Peterson.
That's nice.
Now, I'm an American citizen. I became an American citizen June 22nd, 1956.
Okay. So Harvey had a 180-acre farm in Greenville, Michigan?
No, in McBride.
In McBride, okay. And he sponsored your family. So what do you remember about the ship ride over to America?
Oh, well, first place when we got to Grown, there was a, I think not actually a picture, but they show a picture of a ship or whatever somewhere in here.
Okay. And okay, well, I can hold it up for the.
That's the type of ship. That
Well, hold it up for the camera. Do you remember?
And this was the supposedly, according to this, a general who was in charge of the United Nations Relief Organization
Okay.
in Groom.
Okay. And you don't remember the name of your ship?
Yes, I do.
Oh, what was
I
it?
came in a Hershey box. It was General Hershey.
Really? Okay. Okay. And how long did that trip take?
9 or 10 days, etc. My mother was sick all the time there.
Aw.
My father, me on the other hand, one of the ship experiences was, you know, because a lot of people weren't eating on the ship.
Because they didn't
And
feel
he
well.
didn't feel well. He loved food.
Yeah.
And I remember this one time just going down to the dining on the ship and loaded up his plate, whatever, and he's eating there, and this lady is sitting across the table, and she looked at him, and she ran upstairs. I guess she was throwing up.
Just looking at it.
Yeah.
Oh my.
And
Yeah.
we got to New York. Now they talk about Ellis Island. I don't think we ever got, to my knowledge, we didn't get off the ship in Ellis Island.
Okay. I don't think everybody did. No.
We got the coast. There I was met by my father's half-brother, Max Meiers. He lived in New York, Great Neck, New York, and he was rich.
Okay. How long had he been here?
I guess most of his life, etc., because he left as a young man from Latvia.
Okay.
So, but he was.
But still,
In
your
fact, he
dad.
offered a job to my father, but my father had committed to Harvey Peterson, and he said, "No, I can't do that." So he came to Michigan
Huh. I wonder why your dad would commit with a stranger before his brother.
because he already had made the commitment.
Okay.
I mean, in Germany,
Okay.
not here.
Okay.
I suppose he could have changed his whatever, but he didn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd have to ask him.
Okay.
I mean, he can't. He's
Okay.
gone.
So did you stay with your uncle for a couple days, or?
We stayed there for a week. You want my impressions of that?
Sure.
Oh yeah. My first impression of New York was the ship looked to me like was heading for a statue. That's what it looked like because it was foggy and all you could see was the fuzzy outline of the Statue of Liberty. And to me it looked like we were heading straight for it. Of course we didn't. We landed there, but when the fog lifted, I thought I was on another planet. I had
Really?
never seen buildings like that in my life. Because in Germany after the war, you didn't see limousines. Well, you saw limousines, but you saw cars, but they were limousines. Because after the war, all you saw was the German vehicles. Most of it was done with bicycles or these three-wheel cars, which is the three-wheel carts were rather interesting, or vehicles. I guess they were like motorcycles just built into a sort of a truck. And anyway, you go to the market and they had these peddlers
Okay.
loaded down with their goods on their thing. And we as kids used to tease them. Well, what happens if the guy would jerk quick enough, etc., he would tip the thing over. And then but anyway, that was...
That was some amusement.
But when it came to the United States, I had never seen so many limousines in my life.
It really struck you.
Of course, Max picks us up, and how he knew that my father was there to this day, I still don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we spent a week there. He took us to New York Music Hall, Empire State Building, all the other places. Gave my father some money and a new set of clothes for each of us.
Wow.
That
That
was-
was real nice. Yeah.
Heck, it was. In Germany, my father was a pretty good tailor. In fact, I was one of the few kids that had a nice suit. It was converted from a German uniform because
really?
my father had made it.
So he was a farmer and a tailor.
My father was actually what I call a survivor.
Uh-huh.
And by that I mean he would make do with what he had.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had a sewing machine stored in my garage till about 2 weeks ago. I got tired of looking at it. Tried to offer it to my brother's kids and my kids. Nobody wanted it.
This was
What
your
was
dad's?
unique about that sewing machine was it was a regular sewing machine that he had converted to where you could sew leather or anything they could. It was one of those old pedal kind,
Oh, yeah.
etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I finally gave it to Goodwill.
Did you? Why
Well, I
did you
got taking up space in my garage. I'm not one that could use it.
I know it. This is a picture of your mom and dad and you boys?
This is the immigration picture that was required to go to the United States before.
So you had that taken to Germany?
Should tell you here just a minute.
It looks
Can
like
I
a
turn
reprint.
this now?
Sure, sure. I think that's a reprint. I don't think it says on the back. But anyway, so you did have
It
that.
says 11/21. That can't be because I've had this picture.
I think it's a reprint.
It probably is a reprint.
Yeah.
It could be,
Yeah.
etc.
Okay.
Because I took it out of my photo album because you can see the way the surface of the film.
That's what I think too. Yeah, yeah. Anyway.
So I think my brother's wife, she's the historian of the family. I think that's where I got it from.
Okay, good, good. Well, I'm looking at the time. I think what we need to do, Paul, is let's fast forward a little bit. You, so you grew up in McBride? No,
I grew up in Grand Rapids.
in Grand Rapids. Where did you end up living?
Well, my father, we lived on Crescent Street for quite a few years. 416, I think, is the number, etc., in Grand Rapids.
Mm-hmm.
It was an apartment, and then my father bought a house on Grand. By that time, I was already in the service.
Okay.
In fact, I was sponsored to the United States Air Force Academy, and the man who sponsored me was Gerald Ford.
Really? Really? So where did you graduate from high school?
Central High School in Grand Rapids.
Okay, and then you signed up for the service.
Yep.
You enlisted.
I enlisted because I didn't make the Air Academy, so I took the tests,
Uh-huh.
but I didn't make it, so I became a citizen June 22nd, 1956.
And what year had you graduated from Central?
In 1956, I can't give you the exact date,
Okay,
but it was
no,
in
no,
June
that's good.
sometimes.
Right, okay, so,
And as soon as I got out of there, etc., I joined the service July 3rd. In fact, I was part of the Selfridge flight in the service.
What does
it was
that mean?
some kind of an anniversary of the Selfridge Air Force Base here. So we got there, and they wined us and dined us, and we went to some kind of nightclub even. It was great. We weren't in the service yet.
uh-huh.
I thought, this is beautiful. I mean, I'm going to like this. Come the day of reckoning or Monday morning, I don't remember the exact days, but anyway, a day later, etc., they swore us in.
Okay.
That was pleasant enough. We got on the plane. That was pleasant enough. But we got out of the other end, which was Parks Air Force Base. That wasn't so pleasant because you had some guy there yelling already at you before you even up. Anyway, that's when I woke up that I was in the service. It was basic training. And one big mistake I had made, they gave me papers, and I'm one of those, I guess on impulse, I never looked at the papers as to what you're supposed to pack.
Okay.
My mother packed this big suitcase. We got out on the other end. The sergeant says, you see those buildings down there? And they look about this big. I mean, it was quite a ways.
And he says, through all the swearing, he says, we're going to do double time. So I step out of line and I said, I don't mind. That was my mistake. I don't mind. Anyway, I said, I don't mind doing this, but what do I do with this?
Meaning your suitcase?
Yeah. I don't want to repeat what he said. He says, but I do know you will fall in and you will do double time. I hauled that suitcase all the way to the barracks. When we got there, they put us through the line, gave us a set of fatigues, boots, whatever it was, etc. He says, now, put tags on one of your satchels, we'll ship it back. I never opened that suitcase. That was my first experience of service.
Oh, gee.
But to be honest with you, since we're covering the veterans thing, my impressions of the service is probably the 4 years, some of the best years of my life. And I'll give you the impressions. Where else in the world can you have 3 square meals a day, a place to sleep to know that you're secure, all the medical care taken care of that's provided by the service? And after boot camp, boot camp wasn't even bad for me. I do remember standing out in the parade grounds at 4 o'clock in the morning and freezing my butt off, but I learned how to sleep on the parade grounds before the sergeant came. I would lock my knees and stand up and just close my eyes, and when he started yelling, then I knew I was back to reality. But those were my impressions. Then, after the service, they shipped me to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. There, I learned communications, because
That was
you took the test, and I remember one thing the man said to me after what I was qualified for. He says, whatever it be, don't be a mechanic. Okay, because I'm poor at it. So anyway, communications, that's
Okay.
where I spent.
okay. And tell me a little bit about what kind of communications, what was involved.
Well, it was radio communications. I spent a lot of time in a Radio Shack on the almost next to the flight line. But what it was, Air Force had communications of what it was New York overseas, and then you had a Bermuda boundary, which was 150 miles. This was before satellites. So when a plane crossed that boundary, you took the load message, how many souls aboard, etc., 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 and you would guide that into Kinley Air Force Base.
Okay.
And we had a New York overseas circuit also, but I never learned how to run the speed key. I did have one experience there where I had to treat a plane that had ditched off of Azores, and I was speechless. And the first time you had a pedal that you pushed down,
Yeah.
and I had to say something, and I got paranoid because I'd never treated an emergency before. So the sergeant came along and put his foot on that pedal. He says, "No talk." So, after Bermuda, after that, they were eliminating that. I guess they had satellite or whatever, for whatever reason.
Okay.
They said, you will work in this tech control facility.
Okay.
What in the world is a tech control facility? So I thought it was some desk job, and I didn't want any part of it. So anyway, the sergeant said, either you go there and take a look at it, or I will order you to go there. Now, pick your choice. You might as well have ordered me, because either way I had to go.
Right.
So I go in there, and there's this little room. You know, not little room, it's quite a large room, actually. There's 2 rows of teletype machines, and from there, across the way, there's a whole wall of communication. There's scopes, there's telephones, etc. and there's these teletype machines, and there's this one man. He's running over there. He's looking at the scopes. He does, and he runs over to teletype machine. He types something. He runs back there, picks up the phone, etc. I'm supposed to work in this place. I don't know beans about
What's going
the
on?
radio signals, etc. But he says, don't worry about it. In 2 months, you will be proficient. And he was right. I had one of the best teachers about electronics, how radio signals operate, and I knew how to operate those teletype machines by the time I left. So when I left Bermuda, they shipped me to McClellan Air Force Base
Where's that?
in California.
Okay.
It's the largest. It was the largest
Air Force Base?
Air Force Base as far as supplies go. Where just about everything that in the Air Force, if you wanted parts, etc., went through there.
Okay.
I get there and I walk through the place there and toodly-doo. There's a military guard there. He says, where are you going? I says, I'm assigned to this place. He says, no, let's see your clearance. So I had in my papers. I didn't have a clearance.
Oh.
They were supposed to get me one in Bermuda, but they didn't.
Oh.
But I worked at this facility. The reason was you had Strategic Air Command circuits going through there. And Strategic Air Command, if you listen to their circuits, they had multiplex units. Multiplex is a signal that's 8 are voice, 8 channels are voice, and 8 channels were teletype.
Okay.
Well, when you have a Strategic Air Command circuit, you got a crypto signal that's set every day, or it was. And it was one end was one and the other end was the other, and you had to coordinate the two.
Sure.
I never got any of the military circuits, couldn't read anything, etc., but you still had to have the clearance.
Oh.
I didn't have one.
Oh. So what'd you do?
They put me in supply. I
Oh.
was there for about 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, they got me in front of a panel and started asking me questions. Do I have relatives back in the old country? Blah, blah, blah. And of course, yeah, I had relatives. Do I write with them? No, etc. They already knew this information because the FBI had visited my mother here in Grand Rapids, and they wouldn't tell her why they were there.
This was before they would accept you in the Army?
No, I was already accepted before I could work in the communications.
Oh, so they just show up at her door after you've been in the service for a while?
Yeah, well, I was at McClellan Air Force Base. I had been for 2 years already in the service.
Yeah.
And because to get my clearance, they had to clear me, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So my mother writes me a letter. She says, son, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, sir. I'll get you the best lawyers, blah, 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 blah. I had a good conduct medal. I was a good boy. Anyway, they gave me the clearance, and I got it. After that, the last thing I remember about the service was they were asking for a re-enlistment. I would have stayed, except rank was frozen from the Korean War.
Okay.
By 1960, it was saturated. You couldn't go anywhere. And I
Right.
thought I was a cocky kid. I could do anything.
Right.
I didn't want any part of it. So
Right.
but what I remember is some guy in the back yelling, they says, we'll give you 10 minutes to think about it. And the guy yelling back there, he said, what do we do with the other 9?
So,
I would have stayed if I thought I could have done better, but because I loved service, the job was easy.
so you enjoyed all your time in your 4 years with the Army? Or the Air Force?
I enjoyed it immensely. Bermuda especially, that was a paradise.
Yeah,
especially for a single guy.
what kind of things could you do there on your leaves or your time off work?
On my time off work? Well, a lot of it, other than spending on the base, and so one of the things about on the base was, well, you had, if you must know about Bermuda, or it was many, many years ago, because this happened in the 1960s, this is 50 years
50
later.
years, yeah.
Right now, from what I understand, the base is no more there.
Okay.
But on the time off, you used to go to the hotels between October and, not between, I'm sorry, between February and October,
Okay.
because that was the tourist season. And there were a lot of girls. You had the Queen of Bermudiana going there, etc. So you'd walk into these hotel lobbies and they had what they call punch parties.
Okay.
That was my first experience.
Okay,
It
tell
was
us.
this big punch bowl party. What it was, the reason for it was, I guess quite adequately, because ladies had to have escorts if you went to one of the clubs there.
Uh-huh.
So you get to the hotel lobby, etc., and they had this punch party. Well, airmen weren't exactly welcome during that period of time, but they put up with them because I guess we served a purpose. I don't know. You'd walk in there, etc., you see a girl sitting there, etc. If you wanted to take her out, you simply go and ask her.
Right.
If she said no, well, there'd be another one there. Pretty soon you had enough gumption, you'd be okay. But you asked me what we'd do in spare time. That was part of it. Part of it. I did a lot of bowling because I enjoyed that.
Okay. Okay.
But I also went to, we'd go to the flatline there and we'd watch the airline people come down because you could, they had a terminal for civilians and then they had the base. It was on the same thing. You
Right.
can go to the terminal there and sit and watch, see what comes in,
Okay.
basically. But one time I was in the military cafeteria, and these people come in and says, "Okay, any airmen in here, get your butt out on the flight lines." We ran out there, and there was this big blimp.
Really?
It had come from Norfolk or someplace. He couldn't land. He says, "Grab the ropes." So I grabbed one of the ropes. I was one of the first ones out there. Well, nobody else was behind me, etc. I'm about 30 feet dangling up in the air, etc., until they finally came in up and pulled it down, etc.
Funny.
Those were my experiences.
Neat. Neat. What do you think, Paul, was, I guess, in what ways do you think you grew when those 4 years in the service?
Grew. I went in as a boy. I came out as a man.
Uh-huh.
That's number one. It still holds true today. And any young man who really, you see, I was too lazy to get an education. If I had pursued it like my brother did, and I'm sorry I didn't, I think service is one of the greatest things to keep you honest. I guess it would be the word, etc., because you stay out of trouble.
And on a good path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be my biggest impression of the service is it makes a man. You know, what you do off time, they play cards, whatever. I understand all of that, etc. And I
Right.
did a lot of that till I learned my lessons the hard way. But nevertheless, in the service, I think you go in as a boy, you come out as a man. In the service, they didn't beat me or whatever. Like I said,
It's pretty
service to
good.
me was pretty darn good.
Now, did you take advantage of the GI Bill when you got out?
No, I did not.
No. No. Okay.
No,
Did you join any veterans groups?
no.
No.
Well, you see, the reason I didn't, and I can explain that,
Sure.
and is I got discharged in California. I had met this lady with 2 kids,
Okay.
and my life was consumed with her, and I thought I could do better on the outside, so
Yeah.
that is the reason I didn't pursue it. As far as joining veterans groups, never had any interest. That's like the association. My father devoted his life to it. He was president of it for 11 years, like I said. He had a cause, etc. My cause is, I was trying to get ahead my causes was my job. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. But
I think you talked about your dad before the camera was on. So your dad was the president of what association?
Latvian Association.
Okay.
He built this building that was here in 504 Grand Northeast.
Okay.
He's one of the ones that created the credit union there. That association is still there today. In fact, they send me, well, I belong to it, so they send me a newsletter, etc. In fact, I was a council member for a few months before when I came back from California.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I bought a house in Greenville, and they said it was too far to travel, so I quit.
Yeah, yeah. So then did you marry that woman with the 2 kids?
Yes, I did. I
Okay.
stayed with her for 20 years, and then she decided she didn't want to be married to me anymore.
Okay.
And during that time, I got 3 of my own.
Oh.
I wanted a boy of my own, and even those 2 were boys. I got a girl. Tried it again. I got twin girls. And they were born on my birthday, so.
So you have 3 daughters.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
One lives here in Rockford.
Okay, good.
And she's quite an actress, although she's married to a stockbroker.
Oh, really? Okay. So I guess that's about it. I think you've talked all about how.
I've talked a lot, etc. I don't know how this is good as that's going to be, but
It's gonna be great.
thank you.
It's gonna be great.
I hope you didn't waste your time.
I did not waste my time at all.
However, I did say if you want more information about these DP camps and people that went through the war experiences, contact the, I can give you the president's name. I'm sure she can help you out. There's a lot of my father's friends still, and I said a lot of them, there's a few of them that's still alive
Really?
that went through those camps. And there's a couple of friends of mine in here that went through the same camps that I did here in Grand Rapids.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that,
Yeah. Good.
and I'm sure the reason I say that you asked me about the camps, etc. There's, like I said, at least I knew of 3 of them. I don't know how many there were. But those refugee camps. A lot of these people were in different camps and have
Right.
different. They came from different circumstances. In fact, I don't know. Is the camera still
Yes.
rolling?
Yes.
In fact, my father's best friend, whose remains I took back to the old country, that's
Yes.
how I mentioned the trip. His experiences were quite different. In fact, him and his wife got split up in Berlin. He never saw his wife again.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yet he wound up here in Grand Rapids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are stories,
Sure.
but they're not necessarily military,
Right,
which
right.
is pertaining
And did
to
did you belong to the Latvian church in Grand Rapids?
I never did. My father did.
Your father did. Okay.
The reason I didn't, because I lived for 25 years in California. When I came back here, I bought a house in Greenville.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you stayed
And
there.
it just-
Okay. Right.
Like I'm probably an outcast when it comes to although most of the people, they know me very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I will turn this off here, Paul. Let's see.